My name is Dr. James Carter, a retired Army canine trainer and behavioral specialist with over 25 years of experience working with military working dogs, WDs. I've seen a lot in my career. Dogs that could sniff out a bomb in a sandstorm, canines that drag their handlers out of gunfire, and bonds between soldiers and their dogs that defy explanation. But nothing prepared me for the story of Rex, a German Shepherd K9, and his handler, Army veteran Ethan Marshall. What I'm about to share isn't just a tale of survival. It's a testament to the unbreakable loyalty of a military dog and the fight for justice that brought him home after 3 years of hell. This story will make you believe in miracles, but it'll also make you question the systems we trust to protect our heroes, both human and canine. It all started with a phone call I received on a crisp fall morning in September 2024. I was at my cabin in Montana, sipping black coffee and watching the sunrise over the Rockies, when my old Army buddy, Captain Mark Delaney, reached out. Mark and I had served together in the early 2000s, training K9 units for deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. He knew I had a soft spot for German Shepherds. They're the gold standard for military work, with their intelligence, strength, and unwavering loyalty. Mark's voice was tense. Urgent. Jim, I've got a situation. You're not going to believe this, but we've got a canine that might have just come back from the dead. He told me about Ethan Marshall, a 32-year-old Army veteran living in a small town in Tennessee. Ethan had served 2 tours in Afghanistan with his canine partner, Rex, a German Shepherd assigned to Unit 42 Bravo. They were an elite team, known for their ability to detect improvised explosive devices, IEDs, and navigate high-risk patrols. Ethan and Rex had been through it all. Dust storms, ambushes, firefights. Rex had saved Ethan's life more times than he could count, once tackling him to the ground just seconds before an RPG exploded nearby. But on their last mission in Kandahar in 2021, everything went wrong. It was supposed to be a routine patrol, a sweep through a village on the outskirts of the city. Ethan and Rex were leading the unit, with Rex sniffing ahead for explosives. Suddenly, an IED detonated. The blast was deafening, a wall of fire and debris that knocked Ethan unconscious. Rex, reacting on instinct, had lunged toward Ethan, trying to shield him. When Ethan woke up in a field hospital 3 days later, his body was a mess. Shrapnel in his leg, a concussion, and 3 broken ribs. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the news he received. Your dog didn't make it, his commanding officer had said. No K9 could have survived that blast. We couldn't recover the body. For Ethan, losing Rex was like losing a piece of his soul. In my years as a canine behavior expert, I've seen this kind of bond countless times. Military dogs aren't just tools. They're partners. They sleep beside their handlers, eat with them, and face death together. For Ethan, Rex was more than a K9. He was the one constant in a world of chaos. The only living being Ethan trusted completely. When Ethan was medically discharged and sent back to Tennessee, he carried that loss like a weight on his chest. He tried to rebuild his life, opening a small auto repair shop in his hometown. But the silence was unbearable. No bark to greet him in the morning. No warm weight pressed against his leg at night. Ethan told me later that he'd wake up in cold sweats, hearing Rex's bark in his dreams, only to realize it was just the wind. Fast forward 3 years to a quiet Tuesday afternoon in September 2024. Ethan wasn't looking for a dog. He'd given up on that idea long ago. But a local veterans group had organized a donation drive for the town's animal shelter, and Ethan decided to drop off some old blankets and a few bags of dog food. The shelter was a modest setup, a low brick building behind the elementary school, with a small staff and a row of kennels in the back. As Ethan handed the donations to the receptionist, a sound stopped him cold. A bark, sharp and powerful, echoing from the kennels. It wasn't just any bark. It was Rex's bark. I've studied canine vocalizations for decades, and I can tell you that every dog has a unique voice, like a fingerprint. For Ethan, that bark was as familiar as his own heartbeat. He didn't wait for permission. Ethan bolted past the front desk, ignoring the staff's protests, and ran down the hallway to the kennels. His boots pounded against the tile floor, his heart racing so fast he could barely breathe. In the third cage from the end, he saw him. A German Shepherd, bigger now, with scars on his hind leg and a wary look in his eyes. The dog's ears were forward, tail stiff, not wagging but waiting, as if he sensed something too. Ethan stepped closer, his voice trembling. Rex. The shepherd tilted his head, took a cautious step forward, and then let out a low, familiar whine, a sound Rex used to make when Ethan would return to base after a long mission. It was a sound that had haunted Ethan's dreams for 3 years. Ethan dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face. Buddy, no way. Is it really you? Rex pawed at the cage, desperate to close the distance, his tail now thumping hard against the metal bars. A staff member caught up, out of breath. Sir, please don't get too close. That one's new. He was found near a rail yard 2 towns over. No microchip. Barely lets anyone touch him, but Ethan wasn't listening, and neither was Rex. He extended his hand through the bars, and instead of growling or retreating, Rex nuzzled into his palm and let out a sound that was half whimper, half cry. Get the keys, Ethan said, his voice breaking. That's my dog. His name is Rex, and I think he just came home. As an expert, I can tell you that a dog's memory is extraordinary, especially for a breed like the German Shepherd. They can recall scents, sounds, and people for years, even after traumatic separation. For Rex to recognize Ethan after 3 years through a cage in a completely different environment speaks to the depth of their bond. But what struck me most was what Ethan noticed next. As the staff opened the cage and Rex bounded out, burying his head in Ethan's chest, Ethan ran his hands over the dog's fur. That's when he felt the scars. Jagged, deep marks beneath the coat, a patch of missing fur near the ribs, puckered and raw. These weren't injuries from the IED blast. They were newer, deliberate. Who did this to you? Ethan whispered, his voice thick with anger. The shelter director, a woman named Maggie, explained what little they knew. Rex had been found a month earlier by a railroad worker, limping near the tracks, covered in mud and burns. It took 3 days for the staff to get close enough to clean him up. They'd scanned for a microchip, but there was nothing. He was skittish, even aggressive at times, Maggie said. We figured he was abandoned or a stray. Sometimes people dump old working dogs when they can't handle them anymore. Ethan's jaw clenched. He's not old, he said. He's not a stray. He's ex-military canine, registered under Unit 42 Bravo. He saved lives, and they told me he died. Maggie's expression softened. I believe you. Anyone can see this dog would follow you into fire. She was right. From a behavioral standpoint, Rex's body language was clear. He was bonded to Ethan in a way that transcended time and trauma. When Ethan took Rex back to his truck, the dog climbed into the passenger seat like no time had passed. He turned in a circle, settled down, and rested his head on Ethan's leg as the engine rumbled to life. Ethan kept glancing over at him, as if afraid he'd disappear again. The ride home was silent, but the air was heavy with unspoken questions. How had Rex survived? Where had he been for 3 years? And who had hurt him? When they arrived at Ethan's small house on the edge of town, Rex perked up, his ears flicking forward, nose twitching. He sprinted to the porch, sniffing every inch as if remembering the place. Ethan watched from the steps, his voice soft. You remember this place? Don't you? Rex looked up at him with soulful brown eyes and gave a soft bark. Inside, everything was as it had been. The bed in the corner, where Rex used to sleep, the dented water bowl by the kitchen. Ethan had never gotten rid of any of it. Some part of him couldn't let go. Now, he didn't have to. That night, Rex didn't leave Ethan's side. He followed him from room to room, as if afraid Ethan would vanish again. When Ethan sat on the couch, Rex jumped up beside him, resting his head on Ethan's lap. Ethan brushed his fur slowly, his other hand holding a worn photo from Afghanistan. Rex in his tactical vest, Ethan in uniform, both staring into the camera with the quiet confidence of 2 souls who trusted only each other. I thought I lost you, Ethan said quietly, but you found your way back. How the hell did you do that? As a canine expert, I can offer some insight into how Rex might have survived. German Shepherds are incredibly resilient, both physically and mentally. If Rex survived the IED blast, he could have been dazed but alive, possibly running on adrenaline and instinct. He might have been picked up by locals, or worse, captured by someone who saw value in a trained military dog. The scars on his body suggested abuse, likely from someone trying to retrain him for their own purposes. But Rex's loyalty to Ethan was stronger than any reprogramming. Dogs like him don't forget their handlers. They'll cross continents to find them, driven by a primal need for connection. The next morning, Ethan woke to Rex curled at the foot of his bed, head resting on his paws, chest rising in slow, peaceful breaths. For a moment, Ethan thought he was dreaming. He reached out, running his fingers through Rex's fur, just to be sure it was real. But as the sunlight filtered through the blinds, the questions began to pile up. Where had Rex been all this time? How had he survived? Who had hurt him? And why had no one told Ethan he was alive? By mid-morning, Ethan was in his garage, a steaming mug of black coffee in one hand, Rex padding beside him. The dog stuck close, ears alert, nose twitching, reacting to sounds Ethan couldn't hear. It reminded Ethan of their desert patrols, those intense silences that always meant danger. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was home. Ethan walked to a dusty storage shelf, pulled down a metal case, and set it on the workbench. He hadn't opened it in over a year. Inside were Rex's old service records, training logs, and mission reports. Everything they'd done together during deployment. He pulled out the file labeled Incident 47, Kandahar IED Blast. It detailed the explosion that supposedly killed Rex. The timeline was vague. K9 presumed lost in action due to proximity to blast origin. No retrieval possible. Ethan frowned. No retrieval, he muttered aloud. What if he survived that blast? Injured, dazed, but alive? Could he have run, been picked up by someone, smuggled out? His hand gripped the edge of the bench as the possibility sank in. He looked down at Rex, who sat beside the toolbox, staring up at him with wide, alert eyes. Did you try to come home, boy? Ethan asked softly. Did they just forget about you? Rex blinked slowly, then stood and walked toward the garage door. Ethan followed. Outside, the late morning sun cast golden streaks across the yard. Rex moved slowly, sniffing the ground in long, deliberate motions. Then he stopped in the middle of the grass, turned toward the road, and sat completely still. Something out there? Ethan asked. Stepping beside him, Rex didn't bark, didn't flinch. He stared at a passing white van, his body stiffening. In an instant, Ethan saw it, the change in posture, the rigid tail, the narrowed eyes. I've seen that stance 100 times in my career. It's what we call alert mode. Rex was assessing danger, just like he had during patrols. The van drove by slowly, then kept going. Rex didn't move until it disappeared around the curve of the street. Ethan knelt beside him. What did you see? No answer, of course. But Ethan could feel it. Rex remembered something. Not just the explosion, not just Ethan, but what had happened in the time they were apart. And maybe who was still watching. That night, Ethan called Mark Delaney, the same captain who had reached out to me. Ethan explained everything, the blast, the shelter, Rex recognizing him, the scars, the behavior. I know it sounds crazy, Ethan said, but I think someone took him. I think someone wanted him gone. Mark was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You're not crazy. And if someone did take a trained K9s, we need to know why." They agreed to meet the next day. Ethan hung up the phone and turned to see Rex watching him from the doorway. Head tilted. You knew they weren't done, didn't you? Ethan said with a half smile. You've been trying to warn me. Rex wagged his tail once, not playful, not excited, just confirmation. Ethan leaned down and looked his old partner in the eyes. We'll find out what happened, I promise. The next morning, Ethan drove into the city with Rex in the back seat. The shepherd sat alert, ears forward, watching every vehicle that passed, like he was scanning for enemies. Ethan met Mark at a quiet diner off Highway 22, taking a corner booth near the window where Rex could sit at his feet. Mark, a thick-chested man with salt and pepper hair and calloused hands, gave Rex a long look before speaking. He doesn't look like a ghost. He wasn't, Ethan replied. He was just thrown away. Mark opened a manila folder. I pulled your unit's debriefs and some classified incident reports. Most of it's still redacted. But there's something odd. After the IED explosion in Kandahar, the report said Rex was KIA, killed in action, no body recovered, no remains. I read that, Ethan said. Here's what you didn't read. Mark slid over a printed form. 2 weeks after your medevac, a private contractor submitted a requisition order for a German shepherd matching Rex's description. Same weight, same scars, same behavioral triggers. They gave him a new name, Maximus. Ethan's jaw clenched. They repurposed him. Worse, Mark said, lowering his voice. They sold him to a private security mercenary outfit called Talonbridge, blacklisted now. But 3 years ago, they were doing contract work in unregulated zones. Border work, political protection, corporate extractions. Ethan leaned back, stunned. They took my dog, lied about it. Rebranded him like gear, like a weapon. Mark nodded. It gets worse. I pulled a vet file Scanned in by accident during a customs search. He was listed as injured during confrontation with handler. Not you. Someone else. Ethan's chest felt like it was cracking. They beat him, he muttered. When he didn't follow their orders, Mark nodded solemnly. Looks like he escaped after a failed transfer. Wounded, drugged, but he ran, somehow made it back here. That's when the shelter found him. Ethan's blood boiled. He looked under the table. Rex was resting quietly, but his eyes flicked up to meet Ethan's, as if he'd heard every word. I want names, Ethan said, his voice low, and I want to know who's still looking for him. Mark hesitated. That's the problem. I think someone is. Ethan looked up. That van you saw the other night? Mark continued. I ran the plates through some contacts. No registration, just a dummy number tied to an old logistics firm that went bankrupt. It's a ghost vehicle. They're still watching. Could be they're trying to cover tracks. Or worse, trying to recover assets. He's not an asset, Ethan growled. He's mine. And he's done being used. Mark nodded. I can help, but you need to be ready. If they come back for him, they won't knock on the front door. That night, Ethan reinforced every lock on his house. He placed motion sensor lights around the property, checked the cameras he'd barely used in years, and made sure Rex had access to every room. The dog followed him closely, sensing the tension. When Ethan sat on the couch, he pulled out Rex's old tactical vest from the storage bin. He held it in his hands for a long moment, then knelt beside his companion. Remember this, he asked, holding it out. Rex leaned in and sniffed the fabric, then pressed his head into Ethan's chest, just like he had the day they reunited. I promise, Ethan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. No one touches you again, not without going through me. He buckled the vest gently around Rex, just like old times. It still fit. Outside, the wind picked up. A branch snapped against the window. Rex didn't flinch, but he didn't sleep either. He sat by the door all night, eyes fixed, ears up, waiting. By dawn, Ethan stood beside him, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug. They think we're just gonna let them take you, he muttered. They have no idea who they're messing with. Rex wagged his tail once, slow, steady. A signal, the soldier and his dog were back on the battlefield. Only this time, the war had come to their doorstep. The sun dipped below the horizon that evening, casting an orange glow over the tree line that bordered Ethan's property. A storm of dread churned in his gut. Every instinct from his years of service told him something was coming, something they couldn't avoid. By now, he'd reviewed the documents Mark had given him a dozen times. Talon Bridge was as real as it was dangerous, and if they'd invested in trained K9s like Rex, they wouldn't take losing him lightly. The asset they'd lost had value, not just in dollars, but in what he knew. Rex had memory, and someone out there saw that as a threat. Inside, Ethan set down new bags of supplies. Water bottles, first aid kits, a flare gun. He wasn't planning to run, but he was planning for more. Rex paced the house, ears twitching at every creak. He moved like a soldier, always between Ethan and the windows, always watching the door. When night fell, they turned off the lights. Ethan didn't want to be seen. He placed Rex's vest on again. Black canvas, faded from dust and sun, with the Velcro tag that still read Rex, K9 Unit 42B. You ready? Boy, he whispered, scratching gently behind Rex's ears. Rex gave one short, low bark. That's when the power cut out. Everything plunged into darkness. Ethan didn't flinch. He reached for his flashlight and gun in one motion. Rex growled, a deep, steady rumble from the chest. Not loud, but full of warning. Someone was on the property. Ethan moved to the kitchen window and peeked through the edge of the curtain. 3 figures, dark clothes, moving low, no flashlights. Trained. Ethan cursed under his breath and ducked back. They're here. He glanced at Rex. The dog was already at the back door, nose pressed to the floor, tracking their movement. Seconds later, glass shattered. One of the living room windows. Ethan raised his weapon. Stay low, he said. But Rex did the opposite. He bolted. Rex, no. Too late. Rex sprinted into the living room and lunged straight into the first intruder coming through the window. A yell. A body hit the floor. Ethan charged in, saw 2 more shapes rush toward the hallway, and fired one warning shot into the ceiling. Get out of my house, he shouted. Another shout. One of the men turned back and raised a weapon. Ethan ducked behind the couch as a silenced round split the air. Rex was still fighting, snarling, tearing, pushing back with brutal precision. The man under him screamed, then went silent. The second intruder tried to drag Rex off, but Ethan tackled him from behind, slamming his shoulder into the man's back. They hit the floor hard, fist, elbow, gun. Ethan wrestled the weapon free and turned it on the man's face. Move, and you die. The man raised his hands. Outside, sirens wailed, growing louder. Mark had arrived. Ethan had tripped a silent panic alert embedded in the back hallway before the lights went out. Help was coming. The third man tried to run. Rex started after him, moving like a shadow. He tackled the last intruder on the front lawn, holding him down until police arrived, teeth bared, growl never wavering. Minutes later, the yard was filled with lights, red and blue flashing through the trees. Officers flooded the property. Mark stepped out of an unmarked SUV, bulletproof vest over his shirt, weapons still drawn. You all right? He called. Ethan nodded, panting. Blood trickled from his eyebrow, his knuckles raw. I'm fine, he said. But they weren't here to scare us. They were here to take him. Mark walked over and knelt beside Rex, who stood in the headlights, still wearing his vest, chest heaving, eyes wild but focused. This dog's been through hell, Mark said, and he still chose to protect you. He never stopped, Ethan said, his voice thick. That night, after the house was cleared, after the bodies were taken, and the arrested men were hauled off, Ethan sat on the porch again, arms resting on his knees. Rex sat beside him. For a while, neither of them moved. Then Ethan said, "They thought you were just a weapon." He looked down at Rex. "But you're the soul of every man you ever saved, and I swear, you'll never be property again." Rex leaned gently against him, the weight solid and steady. In the days that followed, the investigation deepened. Mark visited again, carrying a new folder and a strange look in his eyes. "I've been digging," he said, laying the papers on Ethan's kitchen table. "You were right. They weren't here for revenge. They were here to silence him." Ethan frowned. "What does that mean?" Mark flipped open the folder. "One of the men we arrested used to work for Talonbridge. But get this, he was also stationed near Kandahar 3 years ago. During the same month, you and Rex were hit." Ethan stood straighter. "That's not a coincidence." "No, it's a cover-up," Mark said. "We believe Talonbridge wasn't just buying up K9 units. They were using them to run off-record ops. No government oversight. Covert entries, silent takedowns. And Rex, he was one of the best. They reprogrammed him after the blast." Ethan's stomach turned. "You mean they brainwashed him?" "They tried," Mark said, "but he broke protocol, bit a handler, ran off during a transfer. That's when he was officially lost. They couldn't risk anyone finding out. And now that he's home, they're scared." "Scared of what?" Ethan asked. Mark nodded at Rex, lying quietly under the table, ears twitching at every sound. He remembers too much. Faces, places, procedures. As an expert, I can confirm that military dogs, like Rex, are trained to retain vast amounts of information. They can recall specific scents, locations, and even human faces associated with commands or trauma. If Rex had been used in Black Ops, he could have been a walking liability for Talonbridge, a living record of their illegal activities. Ethan looked down at Rex, his jaw tightening. "I can't believe they used him like that," he muttered. "He was a soldier, not a tool." Mark leaned in. "There's more. The team you stopped, they weren't acting alone. There's chatter that someone higher up is watching, someone who still wants Rex erased." That night, Ethan made a decision. He pulled out a dusty duffel bag from his closet, one he hadn't opened in years. Inside were pieces of a past he'd tried to bury. His old fatigues, a pair of boots, maps marked in pencil, and a small dog whistle engraved with 42B Rex. He called Rex over. The shepherd came immediately, tail still, eyes focused. Ethan held out the whistle. "We never finished the mission," he said, "and now I think maybe we still can." Over the next 3 days, Ethan retraced everything. He looked through Rex's old mission logs, cross-referenced them with the Talonbridge files Mark had dug up. Piece by piece, he began to understand the final operation before the explosions. There was a name, Kellen Reeve, a private contractor who had disappeared shortly after the incident. His file was thin, too thin, and Rex reacted every time Ethan said the name out loud, his ears perking up, body tensing. On the 4th morning, Ethan packed the truck, not to run, but to investigate. Rex jumped in without hesitation, tail wagging once in approval. They drove west toward an abandoned training compound in New Mexico, once used for joint exercises between private contractors and military units. Rumor had it that Talonbridge had staged unauthorized drills there, right before the Kandahar ambush. When they arrived, the place was deserted. Chain link fences rusted and bent, watchtowers empty, windows shattered. But as soon as Ethan stepped out, Rex began sniffing the air, then the ground. Then he froze. Ethan followed his gaze. A door to the main building hung open, just slightly. Rex, Ethan whispered. Lead. Rex moved like a ghost, low, quiet, every muscle trained for this. Ethan followed, weapon drawn. Inside, the air was thick with dust and silence. Old papers littered the floor. Maps hung torn on the walls. Rex turned into a side room and stopped. In the corner was a locked filing cabinet. Ethan forced it open with a crowbar. Inside, hard drives, disks, folders marked redacted operations. And at the top, a photograph, a younger Rex in full gear, standing beside a man Ethan didn't recognize. He flipped the photo over. Asset K942B, reassigned handler. Reeve. Ethan stared at the name, then at Rex. They used you, reprogrammed you, sent you on black missions, and when you broke free, they wanted to erase the evidence. Rex didn't bark, didn't move, but I've seen that look in a dog's eyes before. Recognition, rage, and resolve. Ethan placed a hand on his back. It ends now, he said. No more secrets, no more hiding. Outside, a dust storm began to form on the horizon. But Ethan and Rex stood ready. Together again, not just as partners, but as survivors, ready to expose everything. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. The hard drives, documents, and photographs they'd found sat neatly stacked on the passenger seat as they drove through the desert before dawn. Rex sat upright beside him, ears alert, gaze fixed out the windshield like a sentinel. Neither of them needed to speak. Both understood the weight of what they were carrying. They weren't just hauling evidence. They were carrying the final chapter of a betrayal no one wanted exposed. Ethan had called Mark hours earlier, arranging to meet at a secure FBI liaison office in El Paso. The files they'd uncovered had enough to sink what was left of Talonbridge and implicate several high-level contractors who'd been hiding behind forged signatures and silent operations for years. But it wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about honoring Rex. It was about giving meaning to what that dog had endured. By 10:00, they arrived at the building. The parking lot was quiet. Security waiting at the door. Ethan walked in with Rex at his side, head held high, tail steady. The canine's vest was tight around his chest, the name patch still attached. Rex, K9 Unit 42B. Inside, Mark stood waiting with two agents. When he saw the files, his eyes widened. You did it, he said. Ethan dropped the folder on the table. They used him. They lied to me. They used all of us. Mark nodded. We'll take it from here. This is enough to launch a full investigation. Ethan looked down at Rex. It better be. As the agents began to scan the documents, Ethan stepped into the hallway. Where Rex sat beside a water cooler, Ethan lowered himself to the floor next to his dog and exhaled slowly. You remember him? He said softly, pulling the photo of Kellen Reeve from his pocket. He was the one who tried to replace me, the one who hurt you. Rex didn't react, but I could tell. Beneath the quiet calm, something was still unfinished. Just then, an agent poked his head into the hallway. There's something else, he said. We ran facial recognition on Reeves. He's alive. New name? New ID. He's been working as a consultant in Arizona. We're trying to get a location. Ethan stood. I want to be there when you find him. The agent looked hesitant. That's not protocol. I don't care. Mark emerged from the room and placed a firm hand on the agent's shoulder. He's earned it. 2 days later, they found him. Kellen Reeve was living under the name Jason Rory, just outside Tucson, on a desert ranch, off-grid. The type of place people go to disappear. The FBI moved in swiftly. Ethan rode in one of the unmarked vehicles, Rex beside him, head slightly lowered, but body coiled with energy. As the agents surrounded the property, Ethan stepped out and approached the front door. He had no weapon, just a file folder. And Reeve answered the door with a smirk. He was older now, beard trimmed, eyes sharp. Well, he said, if it isn't the soldier and his mutt. Rex growled, low, steady. Ethan didn't flinch. You ran black ops using a stolen dog. You beat him, reprogrammed him, then left him for dead. Reeves' expression darkened. You've got no proof. I have your name, your picture, your fake contracts, and the dog you tried to erase. Rex stepped forward, ears back, teeth bared. Reeves' hand twitched, like he was considering something. That's when the agent swarmed. He was cuffed within seconds. Rex never looked away from him until the cuffs clicked shut. Later, as they drove away from the ranch, Ethan looked at Rex through the rearview mirror. You remembered everything, he said. Rex blinked slowly, then let out a single, soft whine, not sadness, but release. They drove back to Tennessee 3 days later. No reporters, no press conferences, just two soldiers returning home after finishing the mission they never meant to start. Months passed. The investigation exposed a web of illegal operations. Several arrests followed. Rex's name was cleared, his service record restored, but more importantly, he was finally retired. Officially, Ethan built a new home on a quiet stretch of land surrounded by trees and silence. Rex had acres to roam, a warm bed by the fireplace, and a routine he'd never known before. One night, Ethan sat on the porch, watching the stars. Rex lay beside him, head resting on his boot. You saved me, Ethan said. Twice. Once in war, and once when I didn't know I needed saving. Rex looked up, eyes gentle. You're not just a good boy, Ethan said, his voice breaking. You're the best partner I've ever had. Rex nudged his hand once, then settled back into sleep. As a canine expert, I can tell you that some bonds are stronger than war, stronger than betrayal, stronger than time. In that moment, Ethan understood something I've seen in every great K9 team I've ever trained. Some warriors wear uniforms, and some wear fur. Rex wasn't just a dog, he was a soldier, a survivor, and a hero. And for the first time in 3 years, he was finally home.